if I start telling people about hell, I might just scare them off. Where are you going to scare them off to? Hell number 2? Or are you just going to sit there and let them burn?
So, Carl, can you tell the people, the audience, about yourself before we get into the deeper issues?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Chris, we met at the Deception in the Desert conference back in last November, it was. And I really enjoyed just getting to know you a little bit there, and we had a good way of connecting with each other. It's nice to be able to see people face to face. And the type of work that I do and have been doing full-time since 1997, I've been a researcher in a number of interlocking areas. I look at international politics, so I've been to different United Nations events. I look at transhumanism and technology, and therefore I've been also to a number of transhumanist meetings and different organizations' conferences. I also take a look at the spiritual and the religious side. So that includes going to places like the Parliament of World Religions. Back in the year 2000, I was at the Global Summit for the United Religions Initiative. And there's quite a lengthy list of different events I've attended that way. And I also take a look at things that are happening within the culture as well, particularly the area of what's known as evolutionary culture or transformational festivals. Things like Burning Man, which really is an entity in its own right, to other events across the United States, Canada, and indeed around the world. And so my task is to examine all of these, what look like diverse, and they are, what look like diverse fields of interest, and then to find, okay, where are those commonalities? What are driving them together? And for the last, 20 years, this is what my calling has been as a full-time author, writer, and researcher and lecturer. So back in 97, I helped an author by the name of Gary Kaw do the research for his book, The New World Religion. And I've helped other authors along the way. And I speak at different conferences. I teach a course at a Bible college in southwestern Saskatchewan on secular and pagan trends. And that's the kind of stuff I do.
Rory, I know you have something to say. You heard about Burning Man and stuff like that. Rory always talking about that.
Yes, I did. How did you get started? Number one. And number two, you got to tell me a little bit more about Burning Man.
Okay.
I've done a little research on it too.
All right. Well, how I got started in this type of work. I got started back in the early 1990s. I was working for a healthcare program in a very small town, the town I grew up in. And the healthcare program was manned by some wonderful people on my board of directors, great people, but they were all Masons or members of some other affiliated lodge. And so there's a lot of pressure from 91 till about 93 or so to join Freemasonry. I never did, but some things were said and done that caused me to have to go and examine it with much more detail. I knew nothing about it, gentlemen, really nothing at all. And I didn't want to know anything about it. Frankly, I wasn't interested in going to more meetings. My job as a health I was part of a healthcare kind of a support program for senior citizens, and I had enough meetings already on my plate. So I wasn't really interested at all. And every time I'd ask the guys, well, what do you guys do? They would tell me the same thing over and over again, ad nauseum. We make good men better. So what? So, I don't need to go to more meetings to be made better. So I never did join the lodge, but some things were said. In fact, two of my board members took me aside for a supper meeting and said something to me that I had never ever thought of. It had never entered my mind. One of them said to me, he says, "Carl, we're not Satanists." And I'm like, well, where in the world did that come from? That was like a shot out of the dark. I had never even contemplated this. And so at that point I realized, Mr. Teichrib, you better figure out what in the world they've been accused of and why you would even say something as ridiculous as this. And then for the next, 3-4 years, I spent a lot of time digging into Freemasonry, digging into the philosophy of the lodge, into the ritual works, into their monitors and handbooks. And I didn't even know that there were books written by Christians on the subject. I had no clue of that. My immediate thought was just go to the horse's mouth. Dig into what they say about themselves and what their philosophy, their history, what their goals are. And then at that point, it drove me into deeper research into areas like theosophy, into various other esoteric orders. And from that point on, it just expanded and expanded as I realized that there was a worldview that was being discussed and contemplated within these circles. And that worldview impacted politics. It impacted economics. It impacted culture. It had this continual flavoring. And really, it was a Genesis 3 flavoring that we could be as gods, that we could be like God, knowing good and evil, and that we could be enlightened. And so that was my start.
So this is just like a serious calling from the Lord, because as far as I know, your field, it's like singular to me. I don't see a lot of people going to these pagan conferences and doing what you do, and have been into all sorts of organizations, like even the Mormonism. I saw you do a couple talks at their functions.
That's correct. Yes, I was a speaker at the Mormon Transhumanist Association annual meeting back in 2013. They had me come in as a Christian critic of religious transhumanism. So yeah, I go to different places than normal.
Interesting. But I too was asked to join the Masonic Lodge by a gentleman that he wanted to ask me to take over from what my dad was with the lodge. And I told him no. I said, I am a child of the living God, and I don't want to participate in that at all. At that point in time, I started digging in, and I found out that it was totally contrary to the Bible. Did you find that also?
Oh, absolutely. The very first thing that hit me was that this was a philosophy of universalism. Didn't matter what God I believed in. Didn't matter what God I worshipped. As long as I worshipped a God, a supreme being. And that men of every faith could unite around the altar of Freemasonry. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is contrary to the biblical position where Jesus Christ is the only way. There isn't all these other pathways. The other thing that struck me right away, too, was this constant striving for perfection. Even some of the degrees reflect in their names this idea of constant perfection. So you're always working for a type of perfectibility. You're going from the rough ashlar, the rough brick, to the perfect ashlar, the perfect brick. You're going to be a perfect brick in the wall. And I thought, no. Christ is the one that perfects. Not my works, certainly not the wall, and certainly not.
If you like our videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get all our frequent updates.